All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. Again, thank you for joining us for this webinar today on balancing parenting and work during a pandemic. My name is Dan Bagner. I'm a professor of psychology and a licensed and board certified clinical child and adolescent psychologist at the Center for Children and Family here at FIU. I am also a father of 2 elementary school age children. And so I, as many of you, am also trying to and continuing to try to figure out how to balance work with parenting responsibilities, which of course now includes homeschooling and many other tasks that many of us have not had to deal with before this pandemic. So my goals in this webinar is to provide you with a few strategies that you might find helpful during this challenging situation. And both throughout the first half as well as the second half, I'd like to open up to questions that you may have or comments that you may have. As I said before, you can do that either by submitting anonymous or identified questions through the question and answer chat box, or you can raise your hand and ask questions aloud if you would like to do that as well. I think this opportunity allows for a really nice situation to discuss with one another strategies that may or may not have been useful. And I think it could provide us with a really nice opportunity to learn from one another. So please feel free to join in and participate as you feel comfortable. So as many of you see in this cartoon, this is a physician saying, "Good news, you don't have the coronavirus." And the parent says, "But can you still quarantine me for my kids?" And you see a little chat box from his phone saying, "Kid's not sleeping," and all these stressful things that are happening at the house. And so I'm sure many of you can relate to this cartoon. As you know, this current situation that we're in is completely unprecedented. And it's normal to feel overwhelmed, especially when you're trying to both work full-time from home and care for your children who are home full-time now. So the first message is really, it's important to cut yourself some slack. Most people who have kids are in a very similar boat and are struggling to stay afloat during this crisis. And so this is not a normal time, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed and to feel like things are not always going to go as planned. And so I'm going to try to emphasize that throughout this webinar. And here's just another example of showing that you're not alone. A tweet from someone who said on first reading, I assume the second sentence was the answer to the first. He was retweeting a tweet by someone who was showing some data about how people are feeling in their home circumstance or home situation. And the statement is broken down by the presence of children in their household, showing the data broken down. But of course, the joke is that people are feeling broken down by the presence of children in their household. So again, you're not alone in this situation. I think it's important to remember not to hesitate to reach out to friends and families, especially those who have children, as it can be helpful to talk with others about what's worked, what hasn't worked, and sometimes even just getting a laugh about something that happened can be helpful. To talk about how the other day my son just bolted into my office while I was in the middle of a Zoom call. So that can be helpful. I think also seeing the social media here, it's important to not judge yourself based on people's social media tweets and social media posts. There's an unfollow button for a reason. And so I know sometimes you could be scrolling Facebook or Twitter and see people who are posting all of these elaborate coded schedules and sophisticated projects that they're doing with their children and learning all these new things with their children. I don't think that these individuals are trying to shame other parents, but I think it can sometimes get folks down and feel like, wait, I'm not doing all that. I'm not doing enough. And so it's important to remember you're doing the best that you can. Basically, just making it to the other side of this situation with you and your children healthy is more than enough and more than anyone could ask for. And so it's important, again, to cut yourself some slack. So Another example or message to help yourself first. I know a lot of you, most of you probably have not traveled on an airplane in quite some time, but I imagine many of you are familiar with the instructions that you're given when before you're taking off, with the attendants instruct you about putting on the oxygen mask in the event of a sudden decrease in cabin pressure. And typically what they'll say is if you're sitting next to a child, you're instructed to put the mask on yourself first before putting it on your child. And this may seem counterintuitive because your instinct is to help your child first, but you can't help your child if you pass out from a lack of oxygen. And that's the reason why they're telling you, you need to put the mask on yourself before helping your child. And I think this is really an excellent analogy for trying to manage this current situation. It's important to take care of your own physical and mental health needs in order to best care for your child. We know that in research, parents who have a lot of stress and who are very anxious, that often their children show more difficulties. And so the more that you can take care of yourself in this situation, the better it is for your children. And so one way to take care of yourself is to use what we call the cognitive triangle. And this basically is a way to show that what you do and how you think can affect how you feel. So you can see there the behavior and the thoughts are both, they affect how you feel about a situation. So if we think about behavior first, it's important to do things that you enjoy, even if it's just for a brief period of time. For example, you could exercise by taking a quick walk. You could participate in a virtual exercise class. You could watch a TV show or listen to music or read a book. And it's important to do these things for yourself. The more that you do things that you enjoy, the better you're going to feel. And if you're not doing things that you enjoy, the worse that you're going to feel. And so I know it's hard to find the time, and sometimes trying to find times when either your kids are doing other independent activities, like they themselves are using screens, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit, or maybe they're engaged in some other independent activity, or maybe for those of you with younger kids, when they're napping, or when they're sleeping, if they go to bed before you, or maybe even if you wake up before them. In fact, on one of these webinars in the past, one of the participants said after that they woke up 5 to 10 minutes before their kids woke up just to sit on the porch and have a cup of coffee, and that was something enjoyable, even though it was a very brief period of time, and helped just set the stage for the day for that person. So behavior is really important. What you do is going to affect how you feel. The other thing is the way that you think is going to affect how you feel. And a fancy way of talking about this is called cognitive restructuring, which means that if we change our thoughts, we can feel better. For example, if you're having the thought, there is no way for me to balance full-time work and care for my child at the same time, this is just impossible, you're going to likely feel frustrated and upset. Even though the thought may be accurate, it's not helpful. And you'll likely feel better if you change that thought to something like, I'm doing the best I can do in a very difficult situation, and I'm thankful that I'm safe and healthy and able to work remotely. This is not easy. It takes practice, and it's important to try to prevent those thoughts from coming back as you're feeling overwhelmed. But the more that we try to change those thoughts and think differently about situations, the better that we're going to feel. Another way that you could take care of yourself is through something called deep breathing and relaxation. This is a helpful strategy that can be used to stop those negative thoughts from popping back into your head, and also a way to try to relax your body. When you're stressed or anxious, your heart starts to race, your heart rate goes up. And that creates what's called the sympathetic nervous system in your body. Your body's reacting to stress. And so it's important to do things to try to reduce that stress and that anxiety that may be happening, especially during stressful times like this. And so doing something like deep breathing is a very simple activity and might only take a few minutes to do. And really what it involves is taking a deep breath through your nose and using your diaphragm or your stomach to take in as much air as you can instead of your chest, which would be a more shallow breath, and then breathing out slowly through your mouth. And taking deep breaths in and out will actually slow down your heart rate. If you have a smartwatch like an Apple Watch and you can measure your heart rate in real time, you'll notice that after doing this for a minute or two, you'll start to see your heart rate go down. It really does work, and it will help decrease your stress and anxiety as well. It's important to practice something like this, not just when you're stressed and overwhelmed. And just like anything else, the more that you practice it, the better that you'll be at it. And so it's helpful to just do this on a regular basis to try and get used to how to do this when you are stressed, and then you'll do it again at that situation. So times like right before bed, before you're trying to fall asleep, and other situations where you just have a couple of minutes to do this would be really, really helpful. There's other relaxation and guided imagery tools that can also be helpful. Some of them are really short. There are a lot that are available online. There are, for example, free apps such as Headspace that are available on both iOS and Google Play. And there are also webinars, for example, CASE here at FIU have been holding many webinars on mindfulness and meditation and yoga that can be really helpful strategies for many of you to help take care of yourself and again, and best to take care of your children. And these strategies actually can be helpful with your kids, even with young kids. So for those of you with really young children, doing things like blowing bubbles with them or taking a pinwheel and having them try to blow the pinwheel and keep it continuous over time, that's a really simple way of getting your kids to practice using deep breathing. There's also a cute but cheesy video with Elmo called Belly Breathe with Elmo that you could show with your young kids to teach them how to use deep breathing to help relax, because this situation can be stressful for children as well as for adults and parents. And this is also something that you could do with your adolescents and older kids if you have older children, and tell them a little bit about what you're trying, and if they want to try it out, you can tell them what to do. So I'm going to pause there for a second and see if there's any questions or comments or thoughts before I shift into some strategies on helping your children, now that I talked a little bit more about helping yourself. Any questions or comments by anyone? Okay, so I'm going to move along. I've created an acronym, SAFE, that can help remember some strategies that can be helpful during this time when we're trying to balance the work/school day. And certainly as many of us enter the summer, I know that a lot of summer camps are closed or are doing things online. And so it might look a little bit similar to what the school day is looking like right now. And so these are just some strategies to help make those days perhaps a little bit easier. And I'm going to go through each letter of the word SAFE one at a time. And so that'll help us remember the 4 strategies. So the S stands for scheduling. So as you'll see in this cartoon here, it's an example of working from home with kids. And you have the parents saying, okay, you've got everything you need, right? Here's that project. All right, finally, I have an opportunity to do something. It's just great, I won't get interrupted. And then the child comes back 1 second later, I'm done. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this. And this really just goes to show that schedules are not perfect. It's not going to always go as planned. but you can use trial and error to try to make changes and do things differently the next time. And it doesn't have to be perfect. But it's important to keep in mind some things that you want to consider when you make a schedule. And those are things like the age of your child. If you have a very young child, you may not create lots of independent activities and for long periods of time that your child may not be able to do, versus if you have an older child who's an adolescent who can do things for longer periods of time. So that might differ greatly depending on the age of your child. You want to also think about what kinds of activities am I going to set up in this schedule? Is it going to be sedentary activities or active activities? Are they going to be things that require lots of supervision, or are they going to be things that are more independent? And you want to vary those things throughout the day as much as you can to try to map on to your schedule. And that's the thing, that this schedule, the beauty of homeschooling and doing remote schooling is that the schedule can be focused on your needs and not only on your child's needs. And so you could manipulate the schedule to make it meet the needs and demands of your own job. And so, for example, if you know you have a very important call that you're going to be on Zoom and video conferencing, that might be an opportunity to schedule an activity where you know your child is going to be able to be independent for a little while. And that may include screen time that we'll talk about soon, or it may include free time where they're playing with toys that they really enjoy to play with. And that can be saved for situations where you won't be able to multitask. If possible, you can also try to stagger those calls or meetings with your spouse or other adults in the home, where everyone's not on the same important call at the same time. So as much as you can be flexible, that can be helpful. And it's also important that maybe you have some work that you might not have to focus heavily on. Maybe you're just catching up on some email. And so that might be a time where you can multitask, and where you then may set up some activities for your child to do things that they may need some support. And you can easily shift away from your work for a few minutes to help your child, and then get back to what you were doing if you don't have to focus really heavily. It's important to have a schedule where there's lots of breaks, lots of opportunities for your kids to do things that they enjoy, and not just work and structure all day. And that leads to the next part of the acronym SAFE, which is age-appropriate screen time. So it is certainly appropriate and very helpful to use screen time, especially during this pandemic. And it's okay for your kids to watch TV and use interactive media and use apps on their tablets and on phones. The American Academy of Pediatrics has very strict guidelines on screen use. So for example, for very young children, that is children younger than 2, they recommend no screen time whatsoever. And for kids that are 3 to 5-year-olds, only 1 hour per day of screen time. Now, these were recommendations that were written prior to a global pandemic. And so these are not really reasonable recommendations to abide by and to feel guilty if you're not abiding by. This is an unprecedented time. And in fact, there is growing research, including work that my own team has done, that show that kids actually can learn from educational apps, especially those that are focused on math and reading skills. And so there are some websites that you can go to help find out about the content of certain shows and apps and games. And I have some examples on the slide here. Common Sense Media is a really helpful website where you can go and search for different types of content to see if it's appropriate for the age of your child. And so that's certainly the most important thing, is to make sure that the content of what your child is doing or observing is appropriate for your child's age and for your child's ability. There are other examples up there. Khan Academy and PBS Kids have really good content for kids, especially for younger children. The other thing to consider, and is important to keep in mind, is to monitor screen time. That can be with setting limits on time. And so you can have timers that are built in within the iOS and Android platforms that it shuts off a certain app or a certain game after a certain period of time. So there's ways that you could set that up to set those limits. So again, it's important not to get too caught up in how much time and keeping in guidelines with the American Academy of Pediatrics during this really challenging and unprecedented time, but to figure out what makes sense for your child, what makes sense for your family. There may be days where you have a lot of meetings scheduled, and that may be a day where your child has a lot more screen time, and that's okay. And so just making sure you're setting reasonable limits and making sure you're keeping some sort of track and monitoring what your child is doing on those screens. And screens can also be a really good opportunity to give rewards for kids, that when they're doing appropriate things and they're getting their work done, that they can earn more screen time. And that could be really a powerful tool to use. A silver lining in all of this is that during this crisis, we're fortunate that we have the technological capabilities to virtually communicate and interact with family members and friends throughout the world. And it's important to keep in mind that maintaining social interactions is really, really important for children and adolescents, and should be encouraged, even though it's primarily done right now through video chatting apps and other games. That's healthy and that's normal, and kids do need to interact with other kids. And that's something that we want to continue and maintain during this really challenging time. The F in SAFE stands for flexibility. So things are not going to go smoothly each day, and it's important to go with the flow. You may, is Robert Kelly, Professor Robert Kelly, who is also known as the BBC dad. This was a few years ago, before we all thought we would be doing all of our interviews and calls and meetings in our home, but he was being interviewed by the BBC, and his son suddenly interrupted him during an interview and popped in. And this was something that got a lot of media attention, and was folks thought was really funny and really cute. And this is just something that now happens probably for most of you on a regular occurrence. And that's okay. You're going to get interrupted with meetings. Your kids are going to bolt into your office. You may not even have an office that you could use away from your kids, and you're all kind of in the same space. And that's okay. You don't have to ever apologize for this happening. Sometimes it could just add some needed comic relief during a meeting, that kids might, your colleagues might enjoy seeing your child and getting a good laugh. Hopefully you have colleagues and supervisors that understand the challenges with having kids at home. I think it sometimes could help to start a meeting to say, I'm working with my kids, so right here, they may interrupt. So I, ahead of time, just wanted to give you a heads up. But again, there's no need to apologize. This is just part of the situation that we have right now. It's just important to stay focused on what really matters, and that is that your children are eating and sleeping and staying physically and emotionally healthy and safe during this time. And your days are not going to always go smoothly, and there's going to be things that throw a wrench into a situation. So finally, the E in SAFE stands for enjoyment. So it's really important to try and prioritize some time that you're spending together with your kids and interacting positively with your kids. And it can be really simple and really brief. And it could be during situations that are happening anyway. So when you're eating meals, or maybe reading books before bed, or playing games together. And these are opportunities, again, even if just for a brief period of time, can help provide children with attention that they really need, and then maybe less likely to go during other situations to try to seek it out when you're trying to get work done and you're trying to do other things. And so during these interactions, it's really important to stay focused on the positive and make sure you praise your children and give encouragement for your kids for the things that they're doing at that moment and things that they just did previously well, and not focusing on things that maybe didn't go as well. And so saying things like, I'm really proud of how nicely you did your work earlier today, or thank you so much for playing quietly while I was on my phone, and even commenting on things that are happening during the moment. Like, I'm really happy to be able to have lunch with you today, and it's really nice sitting down and talking with you. And making comments like that can be really, really helpful, and letting your children know what you're proud of, and the positive things that they're doing, and keep focused on the positive. It's also important to recognize and reflect on your child's feelings. They might tell you that they're scared or they're upset, or they might tell you something that they're worried about. And it's important to let them know that you hear what they're saying, that you're listening to them. And the best way to do that is not to say, oh, you shouldn't be upset or you shouldn't be scared, but to say, it seems like you're worried right now, and talk about what they're worried, right? And ask them what they're worried about. We're all experiencing stress right now, and young kids might be scared. They might have heard something about people getting sick. If you have older kids, they might just be angry because this has been going on for so long now, and they're not able to go out and see their friends or do things that they used to enjoy out of the house. And saying statements and comments like, I know you're really frustrated, but this is what we need to do to stay safe, can be helpful comments to say during these kinds of situations when kids are frustrated or upset. Kids need to feel loved. They need to feel cared for, especially during really stressful times like this current situation. It's also important to keep in mind that media consumption, so watching the news, I know sometimes folks have the news on in the background. There are some studies that show that the more that you use media during stressful times like this, can lead to more, or at least related to more stress and anxiety in kids and adults. And so the more you can try to reduce the amount of news that you're taking in, the better in this kind of situation. And there's a lot of negative aspects to the situation. Certainly, as I said, it's unprecedented, and there's just a lot of grief and sadness. But it's important to see the silver linings. And when you have kids, most people will say time really flies fast and quickly. And so as much as you can, try to enjoy the extra time that you have with them right now, as much as you can, because we're all having an opportunity to spend a lot of time with our kids. That can be a really positive thing as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to any questions or comments that folks have. I haven't gotten any questions yet, but that is all I have on my end in terms of information that I could share, but I'm happy to answer any questions or respond to any comments if folks have. Or feel free to raise your hand if you want to say something out loud or make a comment or ask a question. Okay, well, going once, going twice. I'm not seeing any questions. I'm not seeing any comments. So I'm assuming that folks don't have any questions, but if you do end this call and have any additional questions or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out. My email is on the website on FIU. You can reach me at D Bagner. Oh, I'm seeing actually one question. Hold on one second. So I'll hold off with that. So someone asked that their daughter is graduating this Saturday and what can be said to encourage her. I think that's a really great question, a challenging question, because this is a time when, graduating from high school is a really big deal, and it can be really difficult for children who are graduating and not getting to experience the really fun aspects of graduating, going to the graduation ceremony and seeing their friends one last time, and having prom and doing all the things that you typically do. And so I think the most important thing and I'm also curious if there are others on the webinar that have a similar situation and what they've done that may have worked or not worked. But going back to the things you can say is really to empathize, and to say things like, I know this is really frustrating and really disappointing that you're not able to go to graduation. And, let's talk about ways that we can make this meaningful to you. I know that lots of schools are doing creative things to try to make it special for their kids. They're doing drive-by graduation. So I'm not sure if in this situation that is happening. There could be setting up remote calls with friends to celebrate. And there are certainly ways that you could be creative to make this time special. But again, I think it's really important to just share your frustration and your disappointment with your child, and to say, I know you're frustrated and I am too, and this really stinks, and I'm sorry that you're not going to be able to go to graduation like you thought you would. So I think that could be helpful, and maybe your children might have ideas on what way to make this special for them. And there's lots of creativity out there. I've seen lots of, for example, photography businesses that are putting up signs in front of people's houses to show that they have a graduating senior. And as I said, the comment before about the schools doing creative and unique things. So other thoughts or comments on that question? That was a great question. We have another question. So another question is talking about homeschooling, thinking about homeschooling your child before this situation, and now actually if they are home, that's seeming like it's not really going to work out because it's very frustrating to try to focus on schoolwork, and that scheduling things doesn't go as planned. Yeah, I think what this question is revealing is that homeschooling, while the idea I think might sound good, in practice is really, really hard. It's not for everyone. And so, I think in this situation, the school districts have called this remote learning instead of homeschooling. And I think that's useful to think about it that way, and that we're not going to be able to provide homeschooling the way that it's ideal for some families that it does work out for. And that's okay. And I know it's very frustrating because you feel like you wish your child paid attention and focused more on what they were supposed to do, and you're trying to go off and do what you need to do. And again, going back to what we talked about before, that cutting yourself some slack, and it's okay. It's okay if your kid's not going to focus as much as they typically do at school. It's okay. If you don't hopefully we all have bosses and colleagues who are understanding of situations, and hopefully they understand that you didn't get to it today because you had a rough day, and that's okay. Again, keeping your focus on what's so important, which is just getting through this and staying safe and staying healthy, is really what's critical. And as much as you can try to make structure into the day, the better, but of course that is really, really difficult. So hopefully that answered that question. Seeing another question about how to present the possibility of changing schools due to the pandemic. There are a lot of challenges financially to this situation. And so this question relates to, changing from a private school to a public school because due to lack of income, and the loss of jobs now is just staggering. And so there's a lot of changes that are happening. And so, and I feel for you, and this is a really, really hard situation. And it is going to be a shift for for your child to shift schools, I think if we try to think about it, cognitively reframing the situation, I think for most kids, when they go back to school in the fall, whatever that looks like is going to probably be different than what they're used to. And so for this individual situation, while it's going to be a different school as well, I think maybe there's going to be some comfort in knowing that this situation is going to be different for everyone. And school's not going to necessarily look like it did when we started school this year, if we think about timelines on vaccines and when social distancing will continue through, that it looks like it will continue through the fall. And so again, though, also going back to talking about the other situation about missing graduation, and the changing of school is difficult for children. And so reflecting on those feelings, the more that you can just show your kids that you hear them and you recognize and appreciate that they're frustrated and they're upset, that can go a long way. That when you try to get into that space of trying to solve the solution and trying to make them feel better, that can often backfire. That goes for even with your spouse and with other adults in your lives. The more that you just sit back and just listen and let your children share with you their frustrations and their feelings, that can go a long way, and often a longer way than and lead to a lot more better outcomes than if you are focused mostly on just making them feel better, because they're going to be upset about this. And I imagine if you're in the situation as a parent, you're upset about this change. Okay, those are really, really good questions. Hopefully I was able to answer those. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any more. But as I was saying before, if you can feel free again as I'm saying this, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to post it up. We still have a little bit more time. But if you do have questions and either you don't feel comfortable sharing on this platform or you just have questions that come up later on, feel free to email me. My email is D for Dan Bagner, Bagner at FIU.edu. And I'm happy to, if there's additional support that you're needing, I'm happy to try to get you in touch with services or support that can be helpful. Just by the way, our center on campus, the CCF, the Center for Children and Families, is providing a lot of services that are remote right now. So that is a place that you can go to get services for your child if you are looking for that, that there are a lot of opportunities there. And that the website for that, actually, why don't I just pull it up so you can all see. I will share the screen to. So this is our website, the Center for Children and Families. And if you click right on here, view updates and resources, there are a ton of resources for families and children of any age that you can look for more support around. And you could also call our number, which is on the bottom here, I believe. So down here, 348-0477. So you can call us, you can email us for any support that you might need throughout this really challenging time. There are lots of programs that we provide. There's for example, a regular recurring parent club that is free. That's offered as you see here. Actually, there's one, looks like there's one today. So you can even join that if you're interested. So there's a lot of opportunities just right here at FIU for support for your children and for you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I don't see any more questions or comments. So I Appreciate everyone joining the call, the webinar today. I hope this was helpful for you. This was, as I said, the third of these that we've had done. And this will be posted. So if you know of anyone who wanted to join but couldn't join for whatever reason, there will be places to go and find this webinar that will be posted online, and certainly on, I believe, on the CCF website somewhere, and then in other places as well, probably at FIU. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and I hope you all continue to stay safe and well throughout this situation. And good luck to you all.